Hello friends! I think it's no secret that the name Mercedes-Benz is not just one of the most recognizable and significant car brands in the world, but for many, it's practically synonymous with the very concept of the automobile. And that's not just marketing hype, it's a fact backed by history. Nearly 135 years ago, a German engineer named Karl Benz officially patented a vehicle with a gasoline engine, becoming the first person in history to give us the very idea of the car. That event, which took place on January 29, 1886, didn't just change Karl's life, it kick-started the entire global automotive industry. Let's put it this way, if you ever feel like your ideas are too crazy, just remember that Karl Benz once put an engine on a tricycle and called it a revolution. And you know what? He was right. The patent, number 37435, belonged to a simple, innovative engineer named Benz. It marked the start of a whole new era. Of course, Benz's invention looked nothing like the cars we know today. In fact, it was basically a three-wheel bicycle with a homemade engine bolted on. But hey, every great journey starts with a single step, or in this case, a single wheel wobbling down the street. Fun fact, the first Benz patent motor wagon had a top speed of 16 km/h, about 10 milliamperes, weighed around 100 kilograms, and had a fuel tank that could hold just 4.5 liters. Not exactly a road trip machine, but it was enough to make history. And here is a little trivia. The word automobile itself comes from the Greek auto, self, and the Latin mobilis, movable. So Benz literally made the first self-moving vehicle. Take that, horse-drawn carriages! As I mentioned, the official story of Mercedes-Benz begins in 1886, but the road to that first car started much earlier, in 1871 to be exact. That's when Karl, together with his partner, opened a mechanical workshop in Mannheim. It was a classic tale of trial and error, with plenty of setbacks along the way. Karl Friedrich Benz was born on November 25, 1844, in a place called Baden-Württemberg, which is now part of Karlsruhe, Germany. His fascination with all things mechanical probably came from his father, who was a train driver. Sadly, his father died of pneumonia when Karl was just 2 years old, after catching a cold in an open locomotive cab. Talk about a rough start, but Karl's mother was a real-life superhero. Left alone with a young child, she worked tirelessly to make sure her son never went hungry and even got an education. And it paid off. Karl never had trouble with his studies. In fact, his family tree was full of blacksmiths, which back then meant you were a craftsman, designer, technologist, and engineer all rolled into one. No wonder Karl was so handy. As a teenager, Karl was already obsessed with gadgets. He loved photography and fixing wall clocks, so he knew his way around a screwdriver long before he ever built an engine. At 15, he finished grammar school in Karlsruhe, and by 19, he graduated from the Polytechnic Institute with a degree in mechanical engineering. Fun fact, even as a student, Karl was known for his curiosity and hands-on approach. He once took apart a watch just to see how it worked, and then put it back together with a few improvements of his own. After graduation, Karl worked at a machine factory, but after 2 years, he realized he wanted to create, not just repair. He bounced around various jobs, never afraid of hard work, and even worked in agricultural equipment factories and repair shops. But the dream of building something truly his own never left him. In 1871, together with his friend August Ritter, Karl opened his first company, a mechanical workshop that also supplied building materials. Like many entrepreneurs, Karl dreamed of success, but reality hit hard. There were few orders, even less money, and soon the young business owners were deep in debt. Ritter quickly jumped ship, leaving Karl with nothing but his dreams and a pile of unpaid bills. But here's where fate stepped in. To save his company, Karl turned to the father or the woman he was courting, his future father-in-law, Karl Friedrich Ringer. Ringer, a carpenter by trade, saw Karl's talent and determination and lent him enough money to buy out Ritter's share. Fun fact, the dowry from Karl's marriage to Bertha Ringer was literally the money that saved his business. So if anyone ever tells you that love and business don't mix, just point to the Benz family. The marriage of Karl and Bertha Benz is a shining example of a true partnership. They had 5 children, and Bertha's role in the history of the automobile is hard to overstate. Several times when Karl's company was on the brink of bankruptcy, Bertha stepped in, not just with moral support, but with practical help. Here is a legendary story. When sales were slow and the world wasn't quite ready for the horseless carriage, Bertha decided to take matters into her own hands. Without telling Karl, she took the car, loaded up their sons Richard and Eugen, and set off from Mannheim to Pforzheim, a journey of 104 kilometers. Along the way, she stopped at pharmacies to buy gasoline, which was only sold as a cleaning product back then, fixed the brakes at a cobbler's, and unclogged the fuel line with her hairpin. She even used her garter to fix the ignition system. Fun fact, Bertha's road trip was the world's first automotive PR stunt. She didn't just prove the car could work. She showed the world that it could survive real roads, real problems, and even a few creative repairs. After her journey, people started talking about the horseless carriage, and interest in Benz's invention skyrocketed. And here's another fun detail. On the steep hills, Bertha and her sons had to get out and push the car by hand. When she got home, she told Karl he needed to invent a gear system for climbing hills. And that is exactly what he did, creating the world's first automotive gearbox. With his own mechanical workshop finally under his control, Karl Benz dedicated himself to developing internal combustion engines. His initial plan was to sell these engines for use in agriculture and industry. But in parallel with engine development, he was also pursuing another idea, the creation of a self-propelled carriage. The development of his first engine took over 6 years. Finally, on December 31st, 1878, Karl Benz received a patent for a 2-stroke gasoline engine. This was just the first step in a long journey. Over the next 3 years, he patented several key inventions that are now commonplace in cars. A battery-powered ignition system, spark plugs, the accelerator, the carburetor, and a water radiator for engine cooling. A little later, he also invented the clutch and gearbox. Fun fact, Karl Benz didn't just invent the car, he invented many of the parts that make cars work. It's like he was building a giant Lego set, one patent at a time. While Karl was busy tinkering and inventing, his workshop was kept afloat by repairing agricultural equipment and horse-drawn carts. As Karl later said, money was always tight, but his wife never reproached him for it. In fact, she often went without to support his work. Initially, engineers used alcohol as fuel for engines, but it quickly wore out the parts and didn't work well in cold weather. Karl was the first to decide to use gasoline as fuel. The first working version of his engine was completed and successfully tested in 1879, marking the beginning of a new era. 3.5 years later, Karl Benz, based on his workshop and several patented inventions, organized a company known as Benz & Cody. To do this, he had to bring in several shareholders and invest in a small bicycle workshop. It was at this enterprise that Karl Benz managed to establish the serial production of gasoline engines. For the next 3 years, Karl constantly improved them. Fun fact, Karl Benz was a true workaholic. He spent so much time in his workshop that his neighbors probably thought he lived there. By 1882, the company was producing and selling 200 engines a month. Karl Benz worked side by side with his workers day after day. And here's the thought, would the automobile even exist if one day our love-struck hero hadn't decided to construct a self-propelled carriage for his wife, who was experiencing significant inconvenience when traveling from one part of town to another? Taking a 3-wheeled cart with bicycle wheels as a base, Karl installed a steerable steering mechanism with a handle rotating in the horizontal plane on the front wheels. The 4-stroke gasoline engine was located under the seat above the rear axle, and the torque was transmitted to the rear axle by a simple bicycle chain. Overall, the machine was extremely capricious in operation and very unreliable. Nevertheless, it was the first automobile in the world. Fun fact, the first Benz patent motor wagon was so unreliable that Karl often had to push it himself. But hey, at least he got some exercise. Throughout 1896, the motor wagon underwent road tests. Karl, as usual, patented his latest invention. The patent indicated that the mass of this marvel was about 100 kilograms, the car's speed reached 16 kilometers per hour, and the fuel tank capacity was 4.5 liters. On July 30th, 1886, German newspapers informed the world about the appearance of a horseless carriage on the streets of Mannheim called the Benz Patent Motor Wagon Model 1. Inspired by the successfully created and most importantly working design, the engineer continued to work on the car, making certain technical improvements to the design. It took him only 6 months to launch the production and sale of Model 2. Initially, Karl and his wife drove the self-propelled carriage themselves, using it for personal purposes. In 1887, the Benz car went to the World Exhibition in Paris. But it's hard to say that the carriage aroused interest among people. In the 2 years from 1886 to 1888, Benz sold only one car in Germany. And that's when the story that later circled the world happened. Watching her husband's failures, Karl Benz's wife decided to take the initiative with a clever plan. Without asking her husband, she took the car, put her sons Richard and Eugen in it, and set off from Mannheim to Pforzheim to visit her mother. In essence, Bertha made a promotional run on Benz's first car. Fun fact, Bertha Benz didn't just drive the car, she also acted as its mechanic, publicist, and test driver. Talk about a multitasker. This happened on August 5th, 1888. The road was not close, a whole 104 kilometers, but she managed to get to her hometown before sunset. Along the way, Bertha stopped several times at pharmacies to buy gasoline, which was sold as a cleaning agent back then. She repaired worn brakes with leather pads at a cobbler's and a broken drive chain at a blacksmith's. Bertha cleaned a clogged fuel line with a hairpin and replaced a broken ignition system insulator with a stocking guard. Having suffered on the climbs, where Bertha had to push the car along with the boys, she advised her husband to equip the car with a device for changing the engine torque. It was after this that Benz designed the world's first automotive gearbox. Fun fact, Bertha's road trip wasn't just a publicity stunt, it was also a valuable test drive that led to important improvements in the car's design. The story of the world's first female traveler behind the wheel quickly spread not only in Germany but also in Europe, thereby fueling interest in the miracle novelty. A year later, Karl released an improved version, Model 3, when he learned that a four-wheeled car had appeared designed by other German engineers, Gottlieb Daimler and August Maybach. He also decided to build a car on four wheels. In 1893, Benz released a four-wheeled Victoria model with a power of 3 horsepower and a speed reaching 20 kilometers per hour. All this played into Karl's hands, and in just 1 year, 45 cars were sold. An important factor was advertising. The Benz and CA company appeared at car races in 1894. In that year, the editor-in-chief of the Parisian newspaper Le Petit Journal initiated the first car race in history along the Paris-Rouen route. All inventions with at least 3 wheels and an engine were allowed to participate. The organizers received 102 applications, but only 25 cars arrived for the qualifying races, including Emile Roget, who came on a new Benz model, the Velo. Fun fact, the Paris-Rouen race wasn't just a competition, it was a showcase for the latest automotive technology. Even though Emile finished 14th, he was awarded the 5th prize in the amount of 500 francs. The car he arrived on was considered only a sports car from that moment on. As the company grew, so did the demands from the brand's emerging fans. In 1901, the world was introduced to another new model, the Mercedes 35 PS. With the release of this car, it became clear that the company was significantly lagging behind modern progress. To improve the situation, a French engineer named Marius Barbaroux was invited to the company. It must be said that initially the relationship between Barbaroux and Benz was tense. The former did not want to put up with the ideas of the latter. Benz, in turn, rejected any innovation. The conflict escalated so much that Benz even decided to withdraw from his own company, fully entrusting it to the Frenchman. Fun fact, the rivalry between Karl Benz and Marius Barbaroux was legendary. They clashed over everything from design to engineering, but in the end, their disagreements helped push Mercedes-Benz to new heights. This action had a number of consequences. It turned out that Barbaroux could not cope with his responsibilities and did not live up to the tasks assigned to him. Only with the arrival of the German engineer Hans Niebel did the company's affairs gradually improve. Under his leadership, the first and most famous racing car in the world, the Benz, was created with an engine power of 200 horsepower. In the post-war years, many new models were created, most of which were successfully produced until the mid-1920s. By 1926, 47,555 vehicles had been produced. The model range included cars such as the Mercedes 35 PS, Mercedes Simplex, Mercedes 4045 PS, and Mercedes 65 PS. Of course, the First World War left its mark on the company's history. The collapse of the exchange rate and the penetration of more successful manufacturers into the automotive market, including such a brand as Ford Motor Company, significantly affected development, leading Benz's company to stagnation, to which there was no end in sight. The solution to the situation turned out to be simple. On June 28, 1926, two competing firms merged into one, creating a new concern, Daimler-Benz. Ferdinand Porsche was appointed as the head. He took the situation into his own hands and personally controlled all production, gradually updating it. The first development under his leadership was the Mercedes 24-100 140 PS model. Fun fact, Ferdinand Porsche, the founder of Porsche, worked for Daimler-Benz for several years before starting his own company. It's like the Avengers assembling, but for cars. By the way, from this moment on, all cars were produced only under the Mercedes-Benz brand. Porsche worked in the company for only a couple of years, giving way to Hans Nibel in 1928, who significantly influenced most of the model range of that time. Under his supervision, passenger cars Mannheim 370 and Nürburgring 500 were produced. Just 2 years later, the Mercedes-Benz 707 appeared, as well as the Mercedes 170. In 1933, the passenger Mercedes-Benz 200 and the sports Mercedes-Benz 380 appeared. In 1935, the new designer of the company became the German engineer Max Saylor, who created such models as the 170V, the world's first mass-produced passenger car with a diesel engine, the Mercedes-Benz 260D, as well as a new large Mercedes-Benz 711. Fun fact, the Mercedes-Benz 770, also known as the Grand Mercedes, was a favorite among dictators and world leaders. It was like the ultimate status symbol for the powerful and wealthy. During the Second World War, the Daimler-Benz concern continued to produce cars until it was subjected to a 2-week aerial bombardment, as a result of which only ruins remained of the concern. In 1945, the board of directors decided that Daimler-Benz no longer physically existed. This did not mean that the company no longer existed. It meant that all efforts would be directed not at building cars, but at building new factories. Already in May 1949, a major modernization of all production was carried out. Almost all cars were still produced in old designs, which significantly affected sales volumes. Changes did not take long to arrive. In January 1952, an improved model with an enlarged body appeared, which received the number W1091. Also, a car model, W1087, was released, which took a place in the middle segment. It was thanks to these two models that the company was able to create a solid foundation for further development, even becoming a leading car manufacturer in Western Europe. Fun fact, after World War II, Mercedes-Benz had to rebuild its factories from scratch. It was a long and difficult process, but the company emerged stronger than ever. After the restoration of production, the concern released a number of luxury segment cars. For the first time, such a car was presented at the Paris Motor Show in 1951. The limousine W186-300 had great success among major businessmen, celebrities, and politicians. The latter category gave the car an unofficial name in honor of the first federal chancellor of Germany, Konrad Adenauer, who had a personal car and highly appreciated it. In 1954, the W186-300B series appeared, equipped with new brake drums and front vents. A year later, the model was replaced by the 300C, equipped with an automatic transmission. Fun fact, the Mercedes-Benz 300 Adenauer was so popular among world leaders that it became a symbol of post-war German prosperity and engineering excellence. Thanks to recognition among car enthusiasts, the company also had new resources to produce not only reliable cars, but also inexpensive ones to maintain. Such was the new car W120-180, and its production continued until the early 1960s. But the largest and most demanded model was the W120 1L80, on which engines with a power of 89 horsepower were installed. The production of large Ponton 220 series continued until September 1959. During the production of Pontons, a solid base was created for the production of future models. Fun fact, the Mercedes-Benz Ponton was named for its distinctive pontoon style, which was a major departure from the pre-war design. Already See you soon. Bye.